On allegations the couple had sedated their children the night Madeleine disappeared, Kate McCann refused to be drawn.
I'm not even going to answer that question, I'm afraid.
I mean, it's ludicrous, and these sort of questions and the publishing of them are nonsense, and we shouldn't be giving them the time of day. There is absolutely no suggestion that Madeleine or children were drugged, and it's outrageous.
If she died then, how could we have disposed of hidden her body, when there was an immediate threat? It's just nonsense. So, and if she died when we were in the apartment or fell and did, why would we cover that up?
Hello everyone, and welcome. As a seasoned crime analyst and storyteller, I'm here to unravel the complex details of true crime cases and present them in a way that's both engaging and easy to understand. Today, we're diving deep into the latest developments in the Madeleine McCann case. Before we start analyzing the case, please comment and tell me where you are from. I will read it all and spread this video to the world. Now, let's get back to the timeline. Portuguese investigators eventually came to suspect that Madeleine may have died accidentally in her apartment, possibly from an overdose of sedatives, and that her parents staged a kidnapping to cover up the tragic truth. Evidence supporting this theory included dog alerts, DNA results, timeline inconsistencies, and behavioral red flags that have never been satisfactorily explained. The timeline discrepancies, forensic results, and the sedative theory could explain what really happened to Madeleine McCann. The point here is not to sensationalize, it's to follow the evidence to its logical conclusion, no matter how unpleasant it may be. Where were you when you first heard about Madeleine McCann's disappearance? For many of us, this case marked the first time we realized that sometimes the most obvious suspect isn't a stranger lurking in the shadows, but someone closer to the victim. Sometimes the most compelling evidence isn't what's found, but what's not. Join me as we peel back the layers of media distortion, political manipulation, and public relations to see what the evidence really tells us about that fateful night in apartment 5A. The truth about Madeleine McCann may be far more terrifying than a faceless predator. It may be a truth that the powerful have worked tirelessly to conceal. Praia da Luz sits on Portugal's southern Algarve coast, a picturesque former fishing village transformed into a tourist haven. In May 2007, the resort town was just entering its busy season, warm enough for beach days, but not yet crowded with summer tourists. The atmosphere was relaxed and family-friendly, with cobblestone streets, whitewashed buildings, and a golden beach framed by dramatic cliffs. Local Portuguese families mingled with British and European tourists, creating a seemingly safe environment where parents felt comfortable giving their children more freedom than they might at home. The Ocean Club Resort, operated by Mark Warner Holidays, wasn't a single secure complex, but rather a collection of apartments and facilities scattered throughout a section of the village. This layout meant guests moved between their accommodations, restaurants and pools by walking through public areas, a critical detail when considering security. The resort offered a babysitting service and a night creche for children, but the McCanns, like several other families in their travel group, opted instead for what they called checking on their sleeping children periodically while dining nearby. Apartment 5A stood at a vulnerable corner position at 5 Rua Dr. Agostinho da Silva with multiple access points. Located on the ground floor, it featured a front door opening to the street, sliding glass patio doors in the rear leading to a small garden area, and a window in the children's bedroom facing the street. The apartment's position meant it was visible from multiple public vantage points and easily accessible to anyone in the area, not just resort guests. Security was minimal. No CCTV cameras, no security guards patrolling regularly, and locks that weren't particularly sophisticated. The layout inside was simple. A combined living room and kitchen area, a hallway leading to a bathroom, the main bedroom where Kate and Gerry slept, and a smaller bedroom at the front where the 3 children slept. Madeleine in a single bed, and the 2-year-old twins, Sean and Amelie, in travel cots. This children's bedroom had a window with shutters that became a focal point of controversy in the investigation. The McCanns arrived at Praia da Luz on April 28, 2007, for a 7-day vacation with 7 friends and their children, a group that became known as the Tapas 9. These were not just casual acquaintances, but included several medical professionals with connections dating back years. Dr. Kate McCann was a GP who had worked in obstetrics and gynecology, while Dr. Gerry McCann was a cardiologist. Their friends included other doctors and professionals, all traveling with young children of their own. For the first 5 days of their vacation, the group established a routine. They would spend days by the pool or beach with their children, put the children to bed around 7:30 p.m., and then meet for dinner at the resort's tapas restaurant, approximately 180 feet from apartment 5A. According to their statements, the adults would take turns checking on all the children throughout the evening. On May 3rd, the fateful evening, the routine appeared unchanged. The McCanns stated that they put their 3 children to bed around 7:30 p.m. Kate reported reading a storybook to Madeleine, who was nearly 4 years old. The twins, just over 2, were placed in their travel cots. By 8:30 p.m., the McCanns had left the apartment, allegedly securing the doors but leaving them unlocked, and joined their friends at the tapas restaurant, where they had reserved a table for 8:30 p.m. The table was positioned such that apartment 5A wasn't fully visible, contrary to some early reports that suggested the parents could see their apartment while dining. This dinner arrangement, leaving 3 young children alone in an unlocked ground floor apartment in a foreign country, would later become a focal point of public criticism and debate about parental responsibility, regardless of what actually happened to Madeleine that night. According to the timeline presented by the McCanns and their friends, the evening of May 3rd unfolded with a series of routine checks on the sleeping children. Gerry McCann stated he first checked apartment 5A at approximately 9:05 p.m. Entering through the unlocked front door, he reported seeing all 3 children sleeping soundly, with Madeleine lying on her side with her pink blanket and stuffed animal. He claimed to have spent a moment looking at his daughter, thinking how beautiful she was, before returning to the tapas restaurant. At approximately 9:15 p.m., another member of their group, Dr. Matthew Oldfield, allegedly offered to check on the McCann children while checking his own. According to his statement, he entered the apartment, but only listened at the children's bedroom door without actually looking inside. He reported hearing no sounds of distress. Kate McCann stated she went to check the apartment at around 10 o'clock p.m. In her account, she entered through the front door and immediately sensed something was wrong, noticing that the children's bedroom door was open wider than she had left it. As she entered the room, she described feeling a draft and noticing the window and shutters were open with the curtains blowing. According to Kate, Madeleine's bed was empty, though the twins remained asleep in their cots. Kate's reaction, as described in her book and police statements, was immediate panic. She said she searched the apartment, looking under beds and in closets, before running back to the restaurant, famously crying, "They've taken her! They've taken her!" This statement, specifically the use of they, rather than asking if anyone had seen Madeleine, would later be scrutinized by investigators. The official narrative continues with the immediate aftermath. The Tapas 9 and resort staff launching a frantic search of the resort grounds and surrounding streets. Gerry McCann described searching the apartment complex while other friends spread out across the resort. Resort staff joined in, and the local police, Guardia Nacional Republicana, GNR, were called, arriving around 11 o'clock p.m., nearly an hour after Kate discovered Madeleine missing. By midnight, according to this timeline, the search had expanded throughout Praia da Luz, with resort staff, local residents, and off-duty police joining efforts to find the missing girl. The McCanns reported that the response from Portuguese authorities seemed disorganized and inadequate, a claim that would become central to their later criticism of the investigation. The official narrative emphasizes several key elements: that the apartment showed signs of a break-in through the window, that Kate immediately recognized an abduction rather than considering her daughter might have wandered off, and that the Portuguese police response was slow and inefficient. By the following morning, May 4th, the case had already begun attracting media attention. The McCanns, particularly Gerry, quickly engaged with the press, giving statements and appearing before cameras. Within 24 hours, Madeleine's disappearance had become international news, with her photo, featuring her distinctive right eye with a coloboma, a rare iris defect, broadcast worldwide. The British government responded with unprecedented involvement for a missing person case abroad. Within days, diplomatic pressure mounted on Portugal to accept British assistance. The UK sent forensic specialists, police liaison, and even deployed the Child Exploitation and Online Protection Centre, CEOP, to assist. A massive public campaign launched with remarkable speed and efficiency. The Find Madeleine Fund was established within days, eventually raising millions of pounds. Celebrities, including David Beckham, J.K. Rowling, and Richard Branson, made public appeals or financial contributions. The Pope granted the McCanns an audience, creating powerful imagery as they held up Madeleine's photo during the papal blessing. This extraordinary global response created a narrative of innocent parents suffering an unimaginable tragedy, while foreign authorities bungled the investigation. British tabloids particularly embraced this framing, portraying Portuguese police as incompetent and criticizing their focus on the parents as potential suspects. If you're finding this analysis eye-opening, give this video a thumbs up so more people can see it. The contrast between the carefully crafted public narrative and the actual evidence collected by investigators reveals why this case continues to generate intense debate and speculation 16 years later. What's particularly striking about the official narrative is not just what it includes, but what it omits. Inconsistencies in witness statements, forensic findings that contradicted the abduction theory, and behavioral red flags that led Portuguese investigators down a very different path of inquiry. The official narrative of Madeleine's disappearance begins to unravel when we examine the numerous inconsistencies in the timeline and witness statements. These discrepancies aren't minor details, but fundamental contradictions that challenge the abduction scenario presented to the public. Perhaps the most significant timeline problem centers around the crucial window between 8:30 p.m. and 10 o'clock p.m. Initial statements from the Tapas 9 suggested a rigorous checking system where children were monitored every 15 to 30 minutes. However, police analysis revealed gaps as long as 90 minutes when no one could definitively confirm seeing Madeleine. Gerry McCann's 9:05 p.m. check became a critical point of contention when an Irish family, the Smiths, reported seeing a man carrying a child, matching Madeleine's description at approximately 9:50 p.m., a time when, according to the official timeline, Madeleine should still have been in the apartment. Jane Tanner, another member of the Tapas 9, claimed she saw a man carrying a child near the McCann apartment around 9:15 p.m., while Gerry was supposedly speaking with another resort guest, Jeremy Wilkins. Yet neither Gerry nor Jeremy recalled seeing Jane at that location, despite the narrow street where this sighting allegedly occurred. This Tanner sighting became a focal point of the investigation until 2013, when Scotland Yard identified the man as an innocent tourist carrying his own child back from the resort's evening childcare, raising questions about why this basic investigative step wasn't taken years earlier. The statements about the apartment itself contained troubling contradictions. Kate McCann claimed she knew immediately that Madeleine had been abducted because the bedroom window and shutters were open. However, multiple staff members who entered the apartment that night stated the shutters were closed and showed no signs of forced entry. Photos taken by forensic teams support this, showing the shutters were difficult to open from outside without leaving damage or evidence. The McCanns later modified their statements, suggesting the abductor may have entered through unlocked patio doors instead, a significant change to their narrative. The checking system itself raises serious questions. If we accept the McCanns' timeline, they left 3 children under 4 years old alone in an unlocked ground floor apartment for approximately 90-minute stretches with only brief visual checks. This system had several critical flaws. The checks were inconsistent and sometimes involved merely listening at the door rather than visual confirmation. The apartment was left unlocked, allegedly to allow easier access for checks, but this also meant anyone could enter. The children were left alone for extended periods in a foreign environment. The system relied on assumptions that the children would remain asleep and that the apartment was secure. Even more troubling is that on previous nights, according to statements from the resort's babysitting staff, the McCanns had been alerted that Madeleine and her siblings had been crying for extended periods, suggesting the children were distressed by being left alone. This information directly contradicts the image presented of a routine, safe arrangement that tragically went wrong on the final night. Behavioral analysis of the key figures, particularly the McCanns, has raised red flags among criminal profilers and body language experts. Several unusual behaviors stand out. Within hours of Madeleine's disappearance, Gerry McCann contacted the media and UK authorities directly, bypassing local police protocols. By dawn on May 4th, he had already spoken with UK government officials and news outlets, an unusually media-focused response during what should have been a time of intense searching and cooperation with local authorities. Kate McCann's initial reaction, immediately declaring, "They've taken her," rather than considering other possibilities like Madeleine wandering off, struck investigators as atypical for a parent's first response. Most parents initially assume their child has gotten up to use the bathroom, hidden somewhere, or wandered away. The immediate leap to abduction, specifically by multiple perpetrators, raised questions. The McCanns exhibited remarkable composure in public appearances and media interviews within days of the disappearance. While grief responses vary widely, forensic psychologists noted the controlled messaging and lack of the disorganized emotional responses typically seen in parents of abducted children. Their disciplined public relations approach, establishing a fund, creating a campaign logo, and coordinating media strategy, displayed organizational skills unusual during acute trauma. Perhaps most concerning was their refusal to cooperate with certain aspects of the investigation. They declined to participate in a reconstruction of the night's events, a standard investigative procedure. Several members of the Tapas 9 refused to return to Portugal to assist investigators. The McCanns also refused to answer 48 questions posed by Portuguese police after they were named as arguidos, formal suspects. A legal right, but one that raised obvious questions about transparency. Former FBI profiler Jim Clemente noted that the McCanns' behavior aligned more closely with parents engaged in image management than with typical parents of an abducted child, who generally remain fixated on finding their child rather than controlling the narrative. What's the weather like where you're watching from? Is it as perfect for crime solving as it is here? Another red flag emerged in the days following the disappearance: the McCanns' physical activities. While most parents of missing children remained close to the last known location, hoping for news or their child's return, the McCanns were seen jogging on the beach and maintaining exercise routines within days. While this could be explained as stress management, it struck observers and investigators as incongruent with the behavior of parents in the acute phase of such a traumatic event. The inconsistencies in the timeline, the problematic checking system, the contradictions about the apartment's condition, and the atypical behavioral patterns collectively created sufficient concern for Portuguese investigators to formally name the McCanns as suspects in September 2007, a development largely portrayed in British media as evidence of incompetence rather than as the result of legitimate investigative findings. The investigation took a dramatic turn in early August 2007 when British forensic specialists arrived with highly trained detection dogs. These weren't ordinary search dogs, but specialized canines with specific capabilities. Eddie, a cadaver dog trained to alert only to human corpse odor, and Keela, a blood detection dog trained to identify human blood, even when cleaned or in microscopic amounts. Both dogs had impeccable records, with Eddie having successfully identified human remains in over 200 cases, including remains buried underground for decades. What happened during these searches shattered the abduction narrative. Eddie alerted to the presence of cadaver odor in 5 specific locations in apartment 5A, behind the sofa in the living room, in the main bedroom, in a flower bed on the patio, on Kate McCann's clothes, and on Madeleine's stuffed toy, Cuddle Cat. The alerts were specific and decisive, with the dog's behavior captured on police video that would later be leaked to the public. Even more damaging, both Eddie and Keela alerted to the McCann's rental car, a Renault Scenic they had rented 24 days after Madeleine disappeared. Eddie indicated cadaver odor in the car's trunk and on the key fob, while Keela alerted to blood in the same areas. The implications were devastating to the abduction theory. How could a car rented weeks after the disappearance contain evidence consistent with a dead body? The McCanns and their supporters offered various explanations for these alerts. Kate suggested her clothes might have been contaminated from her work as a doctor, where she had contact with deceased patients. However, this explanation failed to account for why only certain items alerted the dogs, or why the alerts occurred in specific locations rather than generally throughout their possessions. Regarding the car, suggestions included that the dogs were alerting to rotting food, dirty diapers, or sea bass. Forensic experts dismissed these explanations, noting that these highly specialized dogs are trained specifically to ignore such common odors. Following the dog alerts, forensic teams collected samples for DNA analysis. From the apartment, 15 samples were taken from areas where the dogs had alerted. From the rental car, forensic technicians recovered samples from the trunk area. These samples were sent to the Forensic Science Service, FSS, in Birmingham, England, for analysis using low copy number, LCN, DNA testing, a sensitive technique that can detect minute traces of DNA but is also prone to contamination issues. The initial FSS report leaked to the media indicated that 15 out of 19 markers in the DNA sample from the car trunk matched Madeleine's DNA profile, a finding that Portuguese investigators considered highly significant. However, the final report used more cautious language, stating that the results were inconclusive and that the sample contained DNA from multiple individuals. This apparent backtracking raised questions about potential political pressure on the lab, especially given the unprecedented level of UK government involvement in the case. DNA expert Dr. John Lowe of the FSS explained that while the sample contained components of Madeleine's DNA profile, he couldn't definitively state it was hers due to the degraded nature of the sample. However, he also couldn't exclude it as hers. This nuanced scientific conclusion was often misrepresented in media reports as the DNA evidence being debunked, when in fact it remained potentially incriminating but inconclusive on its own. The most controversial aspect of the case involves the sedation theory, the possibility that the McCann children were given sedatives to ensure they slept through the evening while their parents dined. This theory addresses several otherwise puzzling elements: why the twins didn't wake during the commotion following Madeleine's disappearance, how an abductor could remove Madeleine without waking her or her siblings, and what might have led to an accidental death. Several pieces of evidence support the sedation theory. First, multiple witnesses, including the McCanns themselves, noted that the twins remained asleep despite the chaos, lights, noise, and being moved during the search. Kate McCann described checking their breathing and even pinching them without response. Unusual behavior for sleeping toddlers, who typically wake easily to environmental changes. Portuguese police requested toxicology tests on the twins' hair, which could have detected sedatives used in the preceding months, but the McCanns refused this testing. Second, as medical professionals, the McCanns had knowledge of and access to various sedatives. Kate McCann worked in a general practice where such medications would be familiar, and several members of their travel group were also doctors. While no direct evidence of sedative use was found in the apartment, investigators noted that the family's medication was kept in a blue bag that was moved from its initial location before police could examine it. Third, expert pediatricians consulted during the investigation stated that the twins' uninterrupted sleep throughout the commotion was highly unusual and consistent with sedation rather than natural sleep. Children of that age typically wake easily, especially in response to unfamiliar voices, lights, and being physically moved. The possible scenario that emerged from this evidence was troubling. If the children were being sedated to ensure they slept through the evening, an accidental overdose could explain Madeleine's death. Sedatives affect children differently than adults, and dosing errors can be fatal, particularly in young children. A slightly miscalculated dose, especially if combined with factors like dehydration from sun exposure or interaction with other medications, could lead to respiratory depression and death. In this scenario, Madeleine may have died in the apartment from an accidental overdose of sedatives administered to ensure the children slept while the adults dined. This would explain the cadaver dog alerts in the apartment, the apparent evidence of death rather than abduction, and the subsequent behavior of the parents in potentially staging an abduction to avoid the devastating consequences of such a revelation, particularly as medical professionals who had administered medication to their children outside proper protocols. Forensic pathologists consulted in the case noted that if Madeleine died from a sedative overdose, her body would show few obvious signs of trauma, making it difficult to determine cause of death without specific toxicology testing. The window of time between the last confirmed sighting of Madeleine and Kate's discovery of her absence would have been sufficient for the parents to conceal her body temporarily, explaining why initial searches failed to locate her. This case has so many layers. If you want me to cover more controversial cases like this, comment Truth Seeker below. The sedation theory connects multiple evidence points. The dog's alerts indicating a death occurred in the apartment. The later alerts in a car rented weeks after the disappearance suggesting transportation of remains. The DNA evidence that, while inconclusive, couldn't exclude Madeleine, and the behavioral anomalies observed by witnesses and investigators. It provides a coherent explanation for why an extensive international search never found any credible evidence of an abductor or of Madeleine alive after May 3rd. The investigation into Madeleine's disappearance was plagued by problems from the outset, though not always for the reasons portrayed in British media. The initial police response has been widely criticized with some legitimate concerns, but also many mischaracterizations that served the abduction narrative. When local Guardia Nacional Republicana, GNR, officers first arrived at apartment 5A around 11 o'clock p.m., On May 3rd, they treated the scene as a missing child case rather than a crime scene. This critical error allowed dozens of people, resort staff, friends, family and searchers, to move freely through the apartment, contaminating potential evidence. Fingerprints were not immediately collected. The bedroom window was repeatedly opened and closed, and items were moved. By the time forensic teams arrived the following day, the apartment had been thoroughly compromised. Portuguese police also failed to secure the surrounding area properly. CCTV footage from nearby businesses wasn't collected promptly, and border controls weren't immediately notified. Though given Portugal's open borders with Spain as part of the Schengen area, this may have had limited impact. The delay in treating the case as a potential abduction meant that critical early hours were lost, when roadblocks and comprehensive searches might have been most effective. However, many of the harshest criticisms of Portuguese authorities were exaggerated or misleading. Claims that they took no notes, they did but used a different system than UK police, didn't conduct door-to-door inquiries, they interviewed over 700 people, or failed to collect DNA. They did, but contamination limited its usefulness, served to undermine public confidence in the investigation while deflecting scrutiny from the parents. The unprecedented international pressure transformed what would typically be a local police matter into a diplomatic incident. Within days, British police, forensic experts, and government officials had inserted themselves into the investigation, creating a parallel structure that complicated the chain of command and introduced conflicting methodologies. The British ambassador to Portugal became directly involved, and UK government officials maintained regular contact with the McCanns, an extraordinary level of diplomatic engagement for a missing person case. This pressure had tangible effects on the investigation. When Portuguese authorities named the McCanns as formal suspects, arguidos, in September 2007, the reaction from British officials and media was swift and severe. The Portuguese investigation was portrayed as incompetent and biased, with some British tabloids resorting to xenophobic stereotypes about Portuguese police. This external pressure likely influenced the decision to remove the original lead investigator, Gonçalo Amaral, from the case in October 2007, just as his team was building a case against the McCanns. Several specific investigative missteps hampered the case beyond the initial scene contamination. The decision to send forensic samples to a UK lab rather than Portuguese facilities created chain of custody concerns and introduced potential conflicts of interest, given the UK government's involvement. The failure to conduct a formal reconstruction with all TAPUS 9 members present meant that timeline inconsistencies were never properly resolved. When Portuguese authorities requested this standard procedure, several members of the group refused to participate. The delay in bringing cadaver dogs to the scene, not done until August, 3 months after the disappearance, meant that valuable evidence may have degraded or been removed. Investigators failed to obtain phone records from all members of the TAPUS 9 for the critical hours surrounding the disappearance, missing potential evidence of communications during the timeline gaps. Perhaps most damaging was the political and diplomatic interference that created an environment where normal investigative procedures became nearly impossible to implement. When British Prime Minister Gordon Brown became personally involved, speaking directly with the McCanns multiple times, it sent a clear message to Portuguese authorities about UK government expectations. This political dimension transformed a criminal investigation into a diplomatic balancing act. The case file released publicly after the investigation was archived in July 2008, reveals the extent of this interference. Portuguese prosecutors explicitly cited intense media pressure and lack of cooperation from British witnesses as factors that prevented them from reaching definitive conclusions despite evidence pointing to the parents' involvement. The investigation failures, both legitimate police errors and those manufactured or exaggerated to support the abduction narrative, created a perfect storm where justice for Madeleine became secondary to political, diplomatic, and media considerations. Despite multiple investigations spanning 16 years and costing tens of millions of pounds, the Madeleine McCann case remains officially unsolved. This persistent mystery isn't due to a lack of evidence, but rather to a complex web of jurisdictional issues, political sensitivities, and investigative limitations that continue to obstruct resolution. The original Portuguese investigation, led by Inspector Gonçalo Amaral, was hampered by unprecedented diplomatic pressure from the UK. When Portuguese authorities named the McCanns as formal suspects in September 2007, the reaction from British officials was swift and forceful. Amaral was removed from the case in October 2007 after criticising British police involvement. He later published a book, The Truth of the Lie, detailing his theory that Madeleine died accidentally in the apartment and the parents staged an abduction. The McCanns sued Amaral for libel, initiating a legal battle that continued for years, ultimately resulting in Portugal's highest court ruling in Amaral's favour and affirming his right to publish his professional conclusions. The case was officially shelved in July 2008, with Portuguese prosecutors stating that while there was no evidence of abduction, there was insufficient evidence to charge the McCanns. This ambiguous conclusion left the case in limbo, neither solved nor completely dismissed. In 2011, under pressure from the McCanns and British media, UK Prime Minister David Cameron ordered a new investigation by the Metropolitan Police, Operation Grange, with an initial budget of $5 million that has since grown to over $13 million. Controversially, Operation Grange's remit specifically excluded investigating the parents, focusing solely on the abduction theory, despite the lack of evidence supporting it. This artificial constraint has led many to question whether Operation Grange was designed to find the truth or to provide a more palatable narrative. Recent developments have focused on Christian Bruckner, a German sex offender who was in Praia da Luz in 2007. German prosecutors announced in 2020 that they believe Bruckner abducted and killed Madeleine. Yet 3 years later, no charges have been filed, and no evidence directly linking him to the case has been publicly presented. The critics suggest Bruckner represents a convenient suspect who fits the abduction narrative, but note the timing coincides with Portuguese statutes of limitations expiring for certain crimes related to the case. Several critical questions remain unanswered. Why did cadaver and blood dogs alert in locations associated with the McCanns weeks after the disappearance? How did DNA consistent with Madeleine's appear in a car rented 24 days after she vanished? Why did the McCanns refuse a reconstruction and decline to answer 48 questions when named suspects? Why has no trace of Madeleine or evidence of an abductor been found despite one of history's largest investigations? Why did Operation Grange exclude the parents from investigation despite standard protocol in missing child cases? The divide between public perception and official investigations remains stark. Online communities and independent researchers continue to examine the evidence that led Portuguese authorities to suspect the parents, while official UK investigations maintain focus exclusively on abduction theories that have yielded no results after years of effort and millions spent. Thanks for watching. How do you feel about these arguments and theories? Does it give you a different perspective on the case? Leave your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to receive the latest notifications.